Hello everyone and welcome to Monstrous Flesh, a podcast that explores the evolution and role of women in the horror genre. I'm one of the hosts of the podcast, Megan Kenny.
Hi, and I'm Clelia McElroy, the second host of the podcast.
Lovely to speak to you, as always, Clelia.
Lovely to speak to you too. I'm really excited for tonight.
Yes, so would you like to tell us what film we're doing and give us a little synopsis?
I'm so excited for the film we're talking about tonight. It is The Lure from 2015 by the Polish director Agnieszka Szmudzinska. I'm trying my best here, so I hope I didn't butcher that too much. But the film is set in present-day Warsaw, and it tells the tale of two flesh-eating mermaid sisters, Golden and Silver, who make their way onto land after befriending a group of musicians and joining their band to perform in cabarets. The sisters quickly rise to fame amongst the locals, seducing everyone with their beautiful voices. But the waters soon turn murky as Silver falls for their bandmate, and the sisters are faced with the cruel consequences of this unrequited love. So simply put, The Lure is the mermaid monster Polish musical horror fantasy film the world didn't know it needed, but we're so glad it exists because it is absolutely sublime. What do you think of the film, Meg?
Oh, I loved it. So I'd never seen it until we were going to talk about it for a podcast. And I know you'd said it were a musical. And I thought, oh, well, I do love a musical. And I also, this is personal opinion, I don't think there's enough musical horror films. I'm putting that out there.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
I think the two genres that just mesh really well. And so when I found out it were a musical, I was even more excited. Love mermaids, so excited. And I just really loved it. And I thought it was so visually just sumptuous, and costumes were amazing, and it just looked so brilliant. And such an interesting take on that Little Mermaid story as well, which we'll dive into. How we're going to say, oh no, the sea puns are going to come hard and fast today.
Absolutely, and this episode is going to be full of spoilers because there's no way we can talk about this film without talking about the reveal really and everything.
Yeah.
But I'm the same as you. I mean, I like everything about this film, from the beautiful blue and green hues that make you feel like the entire film takes place underwater. The musical numbers are just amazing.
Yeah.
I think, do I have a thing for 70s Polish disco? I probably do. Yeah.
I definitely do now.
I mean, now I do after this film. Yeah.
Absolutely.
The dance routines, the costumes, the practical effects. I mean, it's just delightful. And as a child who dreamt of being a mermaid, like this film is everything to me, honestly, literally. I was thinking about this because, a few weeks ago we were talking about werewolves, and I think that mermaids are to me what werewolves are to you.
Yeah.
Actually, I was first introduced to The Little Mermaid, but my mum is a fairy tale folklore nerd. I mean not in the most loving way, but as a child, I absolutely loved being in the water. I loved pretending I was a mermaid. So I was like, Mum, I want to see The Little Mermaid, and my mum was like, you didn't mention which version you wanted to see. Psych. So she made me watch a horrible version that was actually based on the Christian Hans Andersen tale, and it absolutely traumatized me. But so I feel like my introduction to Mermaid was really through a horror lens, because the original tale is absolutely horrible. Yeah. So horrible.
Actually, I think I had a similar experience to that, where I saw the Disney Little Mermaid, but then saw a more traditional telling of it. it. And as is the case with most like fairy tales that Disney get their hands on, they just sanitize the shit out of it, don't they? They just take all the gore and the violence and the fun out of it. And and I remember seeing that version, and you know, obviously there's like the knife, and she's got the knife, and she's got to kill him and like stab him to death. And obviously, I mean, look how I've turned out as an adult. Like that obviously spoke to me. I really enjoyed that. You know,
resonated with us.
Yeah, really. Yeah. But I know what you mean. It is a very dark tale, which is why I think I'm surprised that there hasn't been more horror films that have took that story. And I think it's done so well. What I like about it, the musical numbers, like you say, I mean, the disco, love it, would definitely go and, you know, get down every night in that nightclub. But it's how they're a spectacle. They don't try and absorb the musical numbers into like the flow of the film. It's like done like a really old-fashioned musical in a way.
Right,
and you know,
so it's not an operetta, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's pretty much like isolated. You could make like isolate the music videos out of the film almost. Yeah,
and I loved that because obviously it's a fantastical element anyway to a point, you know, but it just sort of added to that. I thought that layer of not fantasy, I don't think necessarily, but just another sort of complexity to it that I just thought were brilliant. And yeah, I really loved it. But
no, it's absolutely beautiful. And sorry.
No, go on.
No, I was just going to talk a little bit about the origins of the story because I was reading into it this afternoon, and the fact that the screenwriter Roberto Bolesto actually wanted to make a movie based on the lives of his friends, Barbara and Susanna Wronski, who actually spent their childhoods in nightclubs with their performing parents. So that was kind of like the origin story for the film. And he brought this script to Agnieszka Szwezinska, who herself grew up in Soviet era dancing restaurants managed by her mother, but actually they kind of felt like the film was too personal, and the sisters who the story was based on felt, you know, they didn't want their stories being told in that way.
Yeah.
So that's when the writer and director decided to turn the main characters into mermaids, and then to add the devouring of people to their talents of singing and dancing. I just think it's such a like, you just can't really see the straight line going from boy stories, but I just love that they went from that to that, and like, in a way kind of like really gel with the with the folklore in Poland and in Warsaw, especially around mermaids. So I just think it's absolutely brilliant that they brought those two elements together, and what we have is a film that is completely genre bending, but just so interesting and so different from everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd seen that as well, that it was sort of inspired by, you know, director's life and lives of people around them, but wanting to remove that a bit of that sort of personal touch. And it's interesting that they picked mermaids, I think, because it could have easily been a vampire sort of film. You know, you could have had vampires in a nightclub because it's nighttime. It could have been anything, I suppose, really. Werewolves, you know, it could have been anything. And it's interesting that they picked mermaids. I'm glad they did, because I would love to see more films about mermaids. But it's
absolutely.
But it's interesting, and I know that she said something about the mermaids themselves sort of act as they represent this innocence. But then she also said about like the slime, which is never a word you want to hear, is it? But like the slime. And it's sort of reminiscent of women's changing bodies as they're like ovulating and then menstruating, and it's this idea that they're sort of innocent but also very sexual as well, very sexually aware sort of from the start, which I suppose feeds into that like sort of siren myth, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But their sort of characters are quite complex straight away, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in terms of, I think they both represent two side of the same coin almost, right? I mean, in terms of, the experience of being a woman, and the body's changing, women going through adolescence, and the naivety and I know we talk a lot about female rage on that podcast, but I think that's very much portrayed through Golden. I love her. I think immediately, from the first scene, when she, her head pops out of the water, and Silver is looking at, the young musician, with like, already you can see, the love and want in her eyes, and I think with Golden, all you see is she's a predator already from that, from the get go, and I absolutely love that about her. But in terms of the fact that you mentioned, it could have been vampires, could have been werewolves, and it's really interesting that they went for mermaids. So according to lore in Warsaw, there's a myth of two mermaid twin sisters, one who decided to swim off to Copenhagen, which is the Little Mermaid story that we know, and the other one found her way to the little village that would then become Warsaw, and it is featured as a statue to commemorate her in the middle of the city, actually. And in fact, throughout the city there are mermaid statues, and it also appears on the city coat of arms. The coat of arms for Warsaw is a mermaid, and that's because they see mermaids as the city protector. They value them as creatures that are fierce and warrior-like, and I think it's a really great contrast to think what happens to the Little Mermaid in the Andersen tale, and then this fierce warrior mermaid. So again, I just love the fact that they've managed to incorporate that element of folklore in that story.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's interesting that I read The Deep by, I think it's Alma Katsu who wrote it, and that's like mermaids. That's about this sort of expedition that finds these mermaids in Mariana Trench, and they are very much the predators, the deep sea predators. And I always think it's interesting that when you look at, and I'll talk as usual, get on my folklore bike, but talk a little bit about how mermaids are presented in different cultures and things. But the overriding image we have now is the Disney Little Mermaid. She's she's very kind, she's very gentle, she's desperate to get on land, which why? I always thought, why would you want to be on land when you could be but she's very much craving that humanity, I suppose, and it's interesting that the teeth are sort of ripped out of her, really, aren't they? She's not a predator, she's not out to fear, she's just this quite limp sort of, I know this is a retelling, so I didn't want to go be too critical of Silver, but I did, as I was going through the film, I was like, just rip this guy's throat out.
I know. Oh my God! The scene where they come back after they, sorry, that's massive spoiler territory, obviously. But when they come back after they they don't know if they killed them or not, and they just kind of chuck them in the water, rolled in carpets, which is already like unforgivable. Like seriously, like what the fuck? And they come back and Silver is very much like, oh, hug me, like oh, I'm back. Hey, like never mind, I forgive you. And I just love that Golden's response to this is like, oh, it's okay, no problem. And then she just goes and rip that guy's fingers off. But there's it's I just love they're both completely different response, but there is not enough there's not enough violence in that moment. So
no, and when he says, oh, don't be upset, but I'll only ever see you as an animal, like a fish. Yes. Don't be upset. Like, what do you mean? Yeah. Don't be upset.
I know. Like, I know. And like, there is all the men in this film are totally obsessed with that. It's just, like the fishtail, that's so impressive, right? They're like they're just such impressive pieces, and I feel like they have those like weird slits in the.
Oh, I know. I was gonna say that about that. Yeah.
when they are in their human form, they are completely smooth as a Barbie doll, front and back, and then when they turn back into mermaids, they have those slits, and the men in this film are fucking obsessed with,
God.
with
sticking the
it's just
fingers
so,
in there.
like,
They're just constantly like trying to stick the fingers in it, and it's like, stop it! What are you
Exactly.
doing? This is awful. Like, as though your first thought upon seeing a mythical creature would be, "Can I fuck it?" That's basically what happens in this film.
Exactly it.
It's like a
Oh my
mermaid.
God, it's horrible.
Oh God, a mermaid! Really? Can I fuck it?
Wait, can
Like,
I fuck it? Yeah.
It's so weird. It's so weird, and I just.
Yeah.
I found that really gross all the way through, and I thought all these men are awful. Like they're all. There's not one.
All these men are
Yeah.
awful, exactly, and but again that brings that back to the Christian and Sanderson, the Anderson tale as well. Well, she's 14 in the
Yeah.
tale, isn't she? Or barely 14, 15, and I think in the film they are obviously quite childlike as well, and you just think that's why all the men in this film have just an obsession. How can they use them? How can I think that the film also makes a great great connection between them, and the theme of immigration is definitely running through the film as well. So it's really about being used and being discarded, no matter whether you're a woman or an immigrant, basically.
Yeah, and I think that is a really interesting element of it, is that idea about them as a metaphor for immigration and for people coming, stranger from another land sort of thing, coming in, and it's how they're treated, which is how can we exploit them, how can we profit from them, use them, and then discard them, as we've already said. When they think they've killed them, they just throw them over a bridge like they're rubbish, they're just nothing. And it's a very uncomfortable truth, but I think that is what would happen. Like, I didn't watch this film and think, oh no, people wouldn't do that. I do. I mean, you only have to look at how people used to be treated historically, in terms of people running freak shows and really awful things like that. That any difference, if someone can capitalise on it, they will. And like you said, they are quite childlike, especially Silver. I feel like Golden always seems a bit more streetwise. She's a bit more, but Silver is so vulnerable. I think she feels vulnerable.
She is, yeah. She's super vulnerable, and you can tell with her that she's so desperate to belong, to be part, to be part of our world. Sorry. Hope we don't get sued for that one. No, she's really wanting, right? She really wants to belong. Whereas with Silver, I think you get with Golden. Sorry, you see, this is really confusing, right? Because Golden is the brunette one.
Yeah.
so I keep getting that wrong. But yeah, so Golden, I think she very much feels like this is a stop in their journey, right? Like they're on. It's almost like it's a holiday, and she's there. Yeah, sure. Let's sing some songs, let's eat some people, and then we'll be on our merry way.
Yeah.
Whereas Silver is very much like, no, this is my life. This is what I want. What do you make of the way? Like, I absolutely love the way they communicate between themselves, with that weird underwater dolphin language thing that they use.
I love that.
Amazing.
I love how they communicate, and no one else can hear it. No one else can tell. And I think when you see scenes of them communicating, and they argue like human sisters, they're always like sort of sniping, aren't they, and arguing and. I love that. I love that that's built in, and I love the idea that that they can transform. They can go from having a fin to legs and back again. That it's not as cut and dry as sort of the original story and Disney version. There's like this transformation element that I think is really interesting. But I think the sort of dynamic we've been talking about with Silver and the floppy haired band boy, whose name I never bothered to learn because I thought he was so awful. But so we've talked.
Mutek.
Yes, so we've talked a little bit about it, and she sees him and she loves him, and it leads her on a bit, and it's all very.
He's awful to
he's
her.
Awful.
It's like there's total unrequited love.
Yeah.
Right? There is literally no like.
It's unrequited love. He's cruel. He uses her when he feels like it. And then obviously, and we've said spoilers. Obviously, then she goes through with his surgery, so she has legs, so she loses her tail forever, she loses her voice, and she's got these legs, and then they have sex, and he's disgusted because she has audacity to get blood on him from this enormous open wound from having this transplant to please him, and then he meets someone else and marries her, and
just like this, just like that, literally, like just like that.
Yeah, and And I think, and I know obviously this is mimicking the original story, but I did wonder, when I was watching it, I did feel very much that it felt like a metaphor for an abusive relationship in a way, that she is trapped in this dynamic, and she's so unwilling to do anything to harm him at the expense of herself, ultimately at the expense of herself, even though all he does is harm her. And it felt very much like that. And I just wondered what your thought was about that.
Yeah, no, I think it can be read on, on so many levels. I think that, the toxic relationship, angle, it definitely, 100% works. I think, again, if we take the theme of immigration, I think that idea of you can try to assimilate, yourself somewhere, and take the shape that people want you, you can take, look like what people want you, and do everything that that is supposedly right to to belong there. But that at first he tells him, I'll always see you as an animal, and it's exactly that. It's like, oh, you can try your best, but basically you'll always be looked at as looked at as like an outcast, and you will never be part of us.
Yeah, well, yeah,
it's just disheartening.
Yeah, and I think you're right as well. And at an even, I suppose, at even deeper level to that, there's that idea of what being a woman and existing and being told that existence is wrong, and how many women, and particularly young women, and I think that's where this idea about it as a sort of coming of age story comes in as well, about how women, particularly when they're younger, try so hard to shape to fit this narrative and to conform and to be like the peers, and to really squash down, and in some cases harm themselves, obviously not as extreme as Silver, but harm themselves to fit these very narrow molds about what it means to be a woman. And I think that's that's a really interesting element of it as well. But it's such a complex film, I think, such a multi-layered film.
Yeah, no, I agree. I read that because it's generally quite well received, right? But I read some reviews that were like, this film doesn't know what he wants to be. But I think it's almost like people are missing the point. It's like it is extremely layered, and you can read it in so many different ways. There's so many different elements to it, and I think, if people shouldn't stop too much at the narrative element of it, because there's some really beautiful thread running through the entire film, and in that sense, for me, it is extremely successful. It just says so much about human nature, for a film about mermaids and monsters,
Yeah.
But again, to get back to your point about Silver, that we can in a way, we like, she is naive, and she's just she changes herself completely for someone who doesn't want her and stuff. But there, at no point do we throw the book at her, because we've all God knows we've all been there one way or another, whether it be in a relationship or for anything, any part of our life, any part of our life where we wanted to belong with, we've all done it in one way or another. So as much as Golden is incredible because she loves who she is, right? She's not trying to assimilate. She's not trying to become something else. She's very comfortable with her monstrous nature, and it's something that we should all aspire to be. But eventually she ends up being the one carrying the pain, with her, because she's the one being left on her own, and it's not fair.
Yeah, and it's not. And I think that I suppose that frustration that I felt about Silver were for her, were on her behalf, were like, you're worth more than this loser. Who don't appreciate you for who you are. Like it comes from that place of dump his ass. Just dump him. Leave him. You're a
Exactly.
mermaid. You could go anywhere. Go. There'll be other. There's a million.
Go off, go.
There's a
Go off with
million
the
of
hot
these.
merman.
Yeah,
Like,
find a merman.
Exactly.
Do what you want. But there's, go to another city. There's millions of these floppy-haired band boys. Honestly, like the dime a dozen.
Exactly.
But
You want a thug boy who plays the guitar on the beach? Trust me, anywhere.
yeah.
It's anywhere.
Oh God, how will you ever replace him? Honestly, but yeah, but I think, but Golden's interesting as well because I feel that her character is allowed much more of a sort of story, a sort of sexual awakening in a way. We see her; she's very comfortable, and she's very. It's interesting that she. She's sort of involved with men. She's involved with a woman. Who actually seems to appreciate her much more than the men do, which I think is an interesting, not unexpected, but an interesting element to it. But she's very, like you said, very comfortable with the fact that she is who and what she is. So she's killing men, creepy men. She's eating their hearts, which is an excellent plot point. I always like to see a bit of heart eating. That's,
Oh, yeah.
we love it.
Yeah.
And she's very comfortable in her monstrousness in a way that is inspiring, that she is just like, well, this is who I am. Like, I'm not going to be any different. And it makes me think again, like there's a very similar dynamic there. Thinking about when we were talking about Ginger Snaps, about Ginger who embraces her monstrosity. And we know that from Ginger Snaps 2 and even in first film that Bridget, much like Silver, is trying to escape this monstrousness. And there's a bit of a tandem there, I think.
Yeah, there's very often this dynamic, right, in those kind of films, because the allure makes me think of Raw as well,
Yeah.
From Judah Ducournau, and where you get that, dynamic between the, again, sisters,
Yeah.
Where one is very comfortable with that, with the, the monstrousness that comes with, that one for flesh, and the other one is actively trying to reject it. So really really interesting. Again, I think it's always interesting to portray those two sides of womanhood that are non-mutually exclusive, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really true, and it is that the sort of showing the complexities that exist within women, but sort of showing them sort of in two distinct characters, and I think that is really interesting. So, with all this in mind and all these complexities and the layering and everything we've discussed, shall we get to the nitty-gritty of the folklore of the mermaid?
Let's do it. Let's do it now. I know you've got some interesting things to tell us.
Yes. So, I had a little look around, as I am wont to do. And I did find out some very interesting sort of stories from across the globe. And we know, just as a point, that a mermaid or merfolk, it are creatures with the upper half of a human and the lower half of a fish, generally. Although there is some discrepancies and differences between whether it's all the upper half or just the head. I'll get to that anyway. It's very interesting.
Oh, yeah.
But Western concepts of mermaids have really been influenced heavily by the legacy of the sirens from Greek mythology. And interestingly, the sirens were sort of part woman, part bird. But this is, through this lens of sort of Christianity and Christian storytelling, it's changed from half woman, half bird to half woman, half fish, which I think is quite...
What?
Yeah, quite an interesting sort of shift.
Yeah, from the sky to the sea.
Yeah, there we
covered it all.
go. Yeah, but it's... So sirens, I'm sure people know the story, but lured boats and sailors to the deaths would sing this siren song, which we do see in the lure. I love that bit when they're singing at the beginning. They're like, "We're not going to eat you. Come in the water."
It's amazing. I love that so much.
I loved it. But that idea about the siren song as being sort of absorbed into a lot of stories about mermaids. It has been suggested that some earlier sightings, so Christopher Columbus, not a man who we should really be discussing without spitting.
No love for him.
But no love on this podcast for him. But he did report seeing mermaids on his many voyages to, rape and pillage and colonise. But it has been suggested that these actually could have been manatees rather than half human, half fish. And I do think we have to consider what it was about these apparently sexy manatees that inspired.
I know. I think it says more about Christopher Columbus
I agree.
Than it does about mermaids.
I agree. But one thing that
fuck anything, basically.
Exactly. Well, it comes back again. Comes back full circle, doesn't it? But they are often depicted holding a mirror and a comb, and this is used as part of Christian storytelling to symbolise vanity, shock, horror, that the woman would be vain. But we do, so in British folklore, mermaids have been seen as sort of harbingers of doom and foretelling and provoking disaster. But there is quite a nice legend from Cornwall from the 15th century about a mermaid and a chorister who fell in love, and he went to live with her in her home at Pendo Cove, and the two can be heard singing in the summertime, apparently. Which is a very nice story. I
love that.
Yeah,
that is nice.
And in the church, the village church, there's one of the benches has got a mermaid carved into it. I think one of these 15th century benches. So that's a nice one.
That's nice. We need more of these, because it's not often that they're used that they get a good story attached to them.
Yeah, absolutely. There is so. The Danish have the hafru, and I'm sorry about my pronunciation, the hafru. So these are beautiful mermaids, but they can be benevolent or malicious, and they are vengeful. So there's a story about one mermaid who had a hand chopped off by a sailor, and so she caused a mighty storm in revenge and sort of shipwrecked him, which, why not?
Fair enough. Fair game, girl.
Don't be chopping people's hands off. It's not polite.
Exactly.
In Chinese mythology, I did find that there was a slight. I don't know. I shouldn't put a value judgment on whether it's concerning or not. I'll see what you think about it. But they have and again pronunciation, the Renyu, who are merfolk who have human genitals, and so widows and widowers would apparently keep them in ponds to have intercourse with. Yes, that was one thing that I found. Hey, not here to judge. If it's consensual,
no,
live and let live.
Exactly.
But there was a lot made about them having genitals when I was looking it up, so I felt like that were a really important part of that mythology.
Are there some illustrations of this? I kind of feel like I can't really picture it.
I will have a look, and we can share them as part of.
Not me being a pervert, just me wanting to get educated.
Yeah, it's all education, baby. It's all education. But one story, what I did think was interesting is one story did mention finding this Renyu with this unkempt, wild scarlet hair to her elbows, which I thought sounded very reminiscent of the Little Mermaid. Disney's Little Mermaid. So that's just something I thought was interesting. In Japan, there's the Ningyo, who can be seen as part of the yokai, so the class of supernatural entities that form a large part of Japanese folklore. But these are interesting because they are presented with a human head and the body of a fish. And there is a picture of those, and I will definitely share that when we're doing the promotion for this podcast, because it's quite horrifying. Just this huge head and then a fish body. It's quite something, I think.
Sounds promising.
Yes, and then in certain parts of African folklore, so particularly in sort of West, Central and South African folklore, mermaids are sometimes referred to as mami water, which means mother of the water, which seems, very nice and very in keeping with this this idea about them being like a force of nature. But they are seen as femme fatales who allure men to the deaths. Now, I don't think that's a criticism.
That was used, Mami Water was used in the film The Nanny by Nikiata Jusu.
Oh, okay. I still need to see that.
Yeah. Really interesting.
Yeah.
And it's the first time I ever saw a representation of Mami Water, so really interesting to bring that up.
Well, staying in thinking about that sort of Africa and that cultural context, in 2012, work on some reservoirs in Zimbabwe were called off because workers refused to return to the sites because they said that mermaids had been hounding them away, which I thought was interesting, showing that, it's still got cultural significance, even in 2012. And obviously, we talked a little bit about earlier about how people have exploited this idea about the mermaid. So P.T. Barnum is one of the first one of the most recognisable, I think, names of people who've done this. So he had the Fiji mermaid, which is one of the most horrifying things you've ever seen. I mean, they should have made a horror film about the Fiji mermaid.
They should. I totally agree.
But you often found this, actually, that when people were sort of doing, exhibitions on mermaids, that they would sew a monkey and a fish together and be like, this is a mermaid. And all I could think of when I was reading it is Imagine the Smell, which is not, maybe that says more about me, but I just thought a dead monkey and a dead fish, like that's a horrifying thing. But also, like, live shows have had mermaids in tanks of water from as early as 1939 with the World's Fair. So it is something that has always, I think, captured imagination.
Yeah.
But yes, that was my little quick world tour of the mermaid.
Okay, thank you. That's but it's really fascinating to see that that the myth is, you find a variation of the myth across across the globe, basically, like so many of them I know, but I think especially with mermaids, and to see the how do you say, so with the myth that are attached to it, I find really, really fascinating. As you said, people refusing to go back to work because there's been, that they believe, there's been a sighting or something like this. It's really, I find that really fascinating.
It is really interesting, and I think, again, going back to The Deep, which I would recommend for people to read, but that's very much modern, very modern in its context. It's like a reality series. They're trying to make this like a documentary about them discovering mermaids, and it feeds into that the hubris of humanity, I suppose, that we always think that we're in control. And that we can just go into something's habitat and we can, take video, take specimens, probably kidnap one, that sort of thing, with disastrous consequences. But it's interesting that endures, that, like I said, that fascination. There is a global fascination with this idea that there are partly human beings, I suppose, like half human, half fish, living in the sea. It seems, and I did see that someone whose name escapes me, a terrible researcher, I'm being a terrible researcher here, but had said that part of that is because of our sort of move away over the course of like human evolution, our move away from nature, and that we have this need and this urge to keep that connection, but it feels fractured, and so maybe I'm surmising from that, I suppose, maybe part of the reason.
No, that's a great way to.
Yeah, maybe part of that reason is because we can't. Maybe part of it is just pure narcissism, that we can't accept that there's a point on the planet that we're not in. that could be big part.
That was exactly the point I was going to make. I was like, is it that, or is it just that we just we have to have a finger in every pie, basically, that we just kind of like, obviously, like, they're going to be part human, like, what else?
Why not? Yeah.
But no, I like this the idea of evolutionary. I think it comes up in the film with I think Golden as an attitude that she truly believes that that they are more evolved beings, basically. So when her sister wants to be full human, she's kind of like, like, dude, what the fuck is wrong with you? We've gone past this. Like, we are so much better off. Like, look what we can do. It's like, why would you want to be so basic?
Why would you want to take a step backwards? Like, this is why,
Yeah.
And it is interesting, isn't it? That idea that that they have sort of evolved, because what's so interesting is that they find this group, they do the brilliant little song about, we're not going to eat your hearts, we promise, and then they're just there, and they can speak the language. There's not that for thinking about like the sort of Disney version and things. There's not that same where she's like combing her hair with a fork.
Yes, exactly.
And she don't know. You don't know what she's doing. There's not really any of that. And again, I think that speaks to this idea that they are like apex predators, that they've just absorbed into environment very seamlessly.
Exactly, and in a way that when you put it in those terms, it also makes you realize how creepy the Disney narrative is over this, or the original tale, that it's a young girl who knows nothing and yet is being completely taken advantage of by but someone else is kind of like, this girl doesn't even know what a fork is. How about I.
Yeah, let's marry her.
Exactly. Yeah. She'll make a perfect wife. Like, she doesn't even, she barely knows, she can barely, barely string a sentence together that makes any sense. So,
she can't talk. For me. She can't talk. She doesn't know where a fork is. She seems good. She seems malleable. I think that's the thing, isn't it? That it's this idea about malleability, that you can, that, again, terrible pun, but that fish out of water sort of narrative. So she doesn't understand out, so she's really easy to maneuver, whereas they come at it from because they're ageless, really. Like, you never know how old they're supposed to be. So there's this, I think you could argue that maybe they are much older and they've done this a lot before, that they've gone on land and they've moved among people before, that this is something they've got experience in, in doing. And so they're not these shy, naive little girls who don't know what's happening. They're very much in charge of their dynamic. And I never feel, and I do think, again, having a woman director, and I think that makes a difference. You don't get that same value judgment placed on them. So yeah, they are able to manipulate people. They are able to sort of seduce, but that's because they're young, good-looking girls. That's not their fault. That's society. That's not
comes with the terrain.
but they are able to do that. But it's never positioned as they're the monster, really. I don't think you ever. I
agree.
The monsters are the people who are taking advantage of them and using them, and and again, that's an interesting layer to it that you see. I'm trying to think of some examples that I'm sure some will come to me, but a similar thing where like the monster is not who you think the monster is. I mean, it's that Frankenstein thing, isn't it? It's going back even to Frankenstein and how the monster isn't the monster. It's that mirror up to society, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's very clear in at the end scene when she when Golden ends up enacting revenge for her sister, but that you don't see her as. I mean, she is portrayed as a wild animal in that in that scene, but actually, all you feel is her pain. So, you're right. In that sense, you're kind of like, well, he's the monster. They're all monsters. They treated them like shit the whole time. They took everything they could from them, and left them with nothing. So,
yeah, but again,
good on them.
Good for her, yeah. But that idea about that abusive sort of grooming dynamic, how when they first find them, they take them shopping and they're buying them clothes. They're like, oh, it's so wonderful, you're going to be part of this, you're going to be famous. And then slowly, you hear them having conversations about, oh, they're too stupid to know what money is. They don't even know what. And you can see that disdain for them. And I do think part of that is probably a jealousy thing as well, that they become bigger. They become the lure, they become the band, and fig and dates or whatever. Is that what they're called? Figs and dates.
I know.
Presenting
the best they could come up with.
Dates.
The fig and dates.
Yeah. But they become the backing band, and so you can see that resentment starting. And there's that really, that scene after when they think that they've killed them, where they all seem to be using drugs. They all seem like they've overdosed. And then this woman comes in, and it's all very dreamlike sequence. But obviously that's a very toxic environment. There's like domestic violence going on, and it's very toxic. Which again, I suppose, there's that veneer of the glamour in the music numbers when they're all high kicking and and then there's that seedy, dark underbelly, and that's another thing I really love about it as well.
Yeah, so do I. I think I like the fact that it is reflected actually in the musical numbers as well. And I was going to ask, that was going to be my next question. I was like, music. I do have some favorite musical numbers from the film, because there are some like really glitzy, glamour one and fun ones. But I think there's also some some that really tie all those themes that you just talked about together really quite beautifully. I mean, one of my favorite one, I made a note of it, is that one where Gordon is, I think time looks like it's frozen, and she's, singing and dancing around the apartment where they all, they all seem to live together somehow.
Yeah,
it's a bit of a weird one, and I can't find. I actually wrote some of the lyrics, so like, oh, they're just so absolutely fantastic, and I can't find them now. Oh, that's it. When she's singing around the apartment, and she sings, "At night I get cravings that aren't quite wholesome because I am sad and so are you. You're all sad and we're all sad and we all gloomy as hell."
Yeah.
And it's just such a beautiful moment, I think. I mean, and I realized that the translation works up to an extent with those songs, but I think that there are some really clever moments in it.
Yeah, I absolutely loved it. And is the loop the one that they sing where it's like their debut as the Lure? Is it? I think it's
yes.
And the dress, and it's very 80s, very black eyeliner and massive hair, and I loved that as well.
Yeah,
that was such a good number. I thought that was brilliant. But yeah, I mean, lyrics in it, some of them are marvelous. Some of them are so mad in a brilliant way. You're like watching it thinking, what are they singing about? I think there's a bit about singing about like potatoes or there's something weird like that, and I was like, this is incredible. I don't know what you're singing about, but I love it. It's marvelous.
I love it. I'm here for it.
Yeah, but I do think that balance, it never, or for me anyway, personally, I never feel like it tips into that. It never tips into farce, and it never tips into feeling like the musical numbers are like a gimmick. It feels very
I agree.
cohesive all the way through. But yeah, I mean, I suppose we should touch on the sad ending, shouldn't we, really? Which, if anyone's ever heard The Little Mermaid, well, actually, no, in Disney that's not what happens, is it? There's an happy ending, because there always is. But
yes,
in the original Hans Christian Andersen tale, she is supposed to stab him to death with a magic knife, and declines to do so. Why? Again,
silly
why?
Girl,
if given the chance. Yeah. And so she turns into sea foam and dies. But there's an interesting...
but not only just that, though.
Oh,
she turns into sea, like she initially turns into sea foam, and then she ascends, and then is transformed into wind, and her sentence is to cool men down for 100 years. And I've actually read somewhere that then her sentence gets extended every time children are naughty. So basically, she'll be the wind cooling down the men for the rest of eternity. Which is like, the heck is that a happy ending? That is.
Oh
awful.
My God, that's awful. I mean, I did read that Disney took out the violence, but also took out like the Christian elements. So there were a really heavy Christianity sort of moral code, like, moral to it. And part of that were that there were the romance element, but she wanted a soul. This idea that like religious people have, that, if you could traverse the seabed forever, you'd be bothered about having a soul, whatever that is. But that she wanted a soul. And so because she returned to sea foam and she ascended, but because she'd died sort of pure of heart, she could have a chance to have a soul eventually. Ugh. Like, who cares?
But they're keeping her on a hook there again. They're like, you could have a soul, but every time she was naughty, you can't.
Oh,
sorry.
No soul for you, heathen.
Loophole.
But yeah, I mean, so, Silver is given her opportunity, and she's, told, you've got to rip his throat out, you've got to kill him before the sun comes up, and she's in his arms dancing, and all the way I'm thinking, please do it, come on. Come on.
Yeah, come on.
Chomp
You get
him.
the fangs out. Do
Teeth
it.
come out. I'm like, come on,
Chomp
chomp him.
him.
Chomp that son of a bitch. Chomp him. He's a piece of shit. Come on. Teeth in neck. And then that next thing, she's just gone in this sea
Bubble
foam,
bath,
bath, and he's just stood there with a wet shirt like, where's Silver? Oh, where's she?
I know.
And you just think, oh, what a waste. That's what I think. What a waste. But then, as we've said, Golden gets a revenge and does indeed. I mean, it's quite incredible. Just sort of jumps on him, which I enjoyed. Jumped on him and ripped his throat.
It's so
out.
powerful, that scene.
But like you said, she's just left then running back into water covered in blood and tears because her sister's gone, and she is left with that pain and that the frustration of what might have been, that your sister's gone forever for somebody who didn't care about her at all. And it's a really sad story. And a lot of Disney stuff's quite insidious, isn't it? And it sort of perpetuates these ideas about love and
change everything for a man.
And just keep loving him and it'll get better. And it's all really toxic. And like I say, I were all the way through hoping that she were just going to turn around and just, kick his head off his neck. Use Finn, slap his head off his neck, but she didn't. And again, if you think about that sort of coming of age narrative, a lot of women don't make it out, do they? A lot of women don't make it to other sides, and it is sad. And it is, and again, thinking about that from like a domestic violence perspective as well. It does feel really sad. And I think, although it's frustrating because you just want her to live and carry on, swimming about and killing creepy men, I suppose it's fitting. It is a fitting ending, even if it's not satisfying.
It is, and it's interesting because we were, when we were talking about Ginger Snaps, for example, and the fact that she has to die at the end because she's a monster, and there is no place for monster in society. And there at the end, you find that the monster lives on, and obviously she still she leaves at the end because she's like, you fuckers, you took everything we had, and so she she still ends up removing herself from society. But I do find it an interesting dichotomy that actually it's one of those rare films where the monster does not get killed. The monster lives on at the end of it. So I mean, even though the monster is not her, obviously, but like in the physical sense of it, then
and I mean, it's interesting because she meets the guy who's in that band who's like a Titan or a Triton. That's it, Triton, isn't he? And but he seems to be much more permanently there. Like that's what he does.
Yeah, even though he says though he says to her, "We're on holiday here."
Yeah,
but it's like, well, when are you leaving?
Yeah, but it's that. I think that were a really fun part of it as well. This idea that merfolk are moving among us. Like it's
I know, I love it. Yeah,
it's a really cool sort of integration again, like that idea we're on holiday and next week we'll be somewhere else and we'll go somewhere else and that they maybe see us as entertainment. I suppose it's like people going to SeaWorld, isn't it? Which is horribly cruel and uncatting, but it's like the alternative. They're like, we're going to SeaWorld.
Sorry, that's brilliant. I love that. Yeah.
But they do build that world, which is nice. It's nice to see such complexity in a film, I think, that does take that time to build that world more than it just being, things feel, because nothing takes me out of a film faster than when someone just plops something in because they just want to move story in a particular direction and you think, hold on a minute, why is this person doing this? Why are they suddenly doing that? And you never feel that in this. I think it all feels like it's obviously a very good, well-written script and really well directed.
I agree. I think it's very, everything feels organic and justified. And I think it's a really great film, and it really needs to be seen by way more people than it has.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I was trying to think about recommendations, unless there's anything else you would like to add about Mermaids or the lure.
No, I think we've covered pretty much everything. I had a point to make actually about just one little thing that I thought about when watching the film. It was that that moment where Silver picks up one of her scales, like she just pulls one of her scale and to give it to that fuck boy, and kind of like as an act of commitment, and it's something really significant for her and really. Really beautiful, but he made me think of, she's willing to mutilate a natural body for him to accept her as, and then he's taken to extremes, obviously, like, later in the film. But he reminded me of another fairy tale, actually, that of the rainbow fish with beautiful scales and all the creatures in the ocean that want one of his scale. At first, the rainbow fish refuses, so she loses all her friends, and eventually she decides to give everyone a scale, and then she ends up with only one scale left, and it's a story that is supposed to teach children about the value of sharing and the happiness you get from it. But I think that's just an awful allegory, because it's basically saying you don't get to be a full person, you belong to everyone else, and if you don't give bits to yourself to everyone, they won't like you. And that's such a fraught message that I think we teach to young women all the time as well. So that's what came to mind watching this, and I was like, this is just fucked,
Yeah, I mean, that's so awful. I think as you mentioned it, actually, I think I remember seeing it, and it's such an awful message, because why do people want a piece of you to be your friend, firstly, and secondly,
that's beautiful.
That's beautiful, let me take it. And I think for women, particularly young women in society, that is a lot of what happens, isn't it? That's seen as it's everyone's right to have access to your your beauty, your body, your mind, your choices, and
exactly.
And it is
you belong to everyone.
Yeah, and it is a very toxic message to give to kids, that you should give of yourself to the point there's only a very small amount left for you, but that's good because you're sharing. Ugh, God, that's awful.
That was like, but where is where how do you define sharing? Because like giving bits of yourself is not.
That's not sharing. That's not sharing. Sharing is like
not sharing.
Sharing's going.
Hands off.
I'm getting chips. Do you want some?
Exactly.
Like,
this is the extent that we will be sharing.
Yeah,
here,
or
okay?
shall we share a bottle of wine, or shall we, at a push, I might share a chocolate orange, a couple of segments, no
at
more.
A push,
But not like giving you strips of my flesh. I think that is a bit much. But like you said, she gives him that scale, and then he just throws it away. There's that scene, he just throws it because it's meaningless to him. But again, what sort of idiot is it that you've got a mermaid in front of you and you think it's like meaningless? What's this guy is just a
this
melt,
guy,
isn't he?
So I was trying to think in terms of recommendation. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind first is that they clearly aren't enough horror mermaid films, because I genuinely couldn't think of any. But I mentioned it earlier in the podcast, and like the film that came to mind watching this was Raw. So I guess that would be my my suggestion for people to watch. And yeah.
Well, I have got two. One I've seen and one I've not seen. The one that I have seen is called Blew My Mind.
Oh my God, yes!
And it's, yes, and that's German. I think it's a German one. And that is, again, this coming-of-age idea about a woman who she sort of finds out that maybe she's not who she thought she were, and it's very beautiful, actually. And there's a lot in there about friendship and the power of friendship, and it's really beautiful. And the second one I've not seen, but it is called Mermaid Song, and I think I saw it listed in one place that said it was from 2015, and then another place that said 2018. So I'm not sure. But I am going to seek it out because it's basically set in the 1930s Dust Bowl, and it's about a woman who is being pursued by some ruthless gangster and then finds out that she's a mermaid.
That sounds incredible.
I mean, it sounds marvellous. I watched the trailers on YouTube, and I watched it and I thought it sounded marvellous. And they've done the thing which I always appreciate, where they've made the mermaid look monstrous. So she's not, like Ariel on a rock in a seashell bra.
Fantastic.
She's like a fish woman.
Yes.
So I would recommend that as well. that is it from us for this time.
That is it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so thank you. And thank you, everyone, for listening to Monstrous Flesh. Please join us next time when we will be discussing The Descent. And I am already feeling sick because I'm claustrophobic. But you can find out more about us via our website, monstrousflesh.co.uk, and also on our social media channels. So if you search for Monstrous Flesh on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, you will find us there. And we'd love to hear from you as well. So let us know if you've seen The Lure, if you liked it, and any other mermaid horror films that you've got. And also please rate and review wherever you listen to podcasts and help us spread our spooky word by telling your friends about Monstrous Flesh. But until next time, creep it weird, everyone.